Hello, everybody. Welcome to Narrative on a Wednesday evening. It's the 2nd of March. And the news today is not particularly good coming out of Ukraine. You know, we've been saying a pretty good news story out of Ukraine for the last week, but it's turning a little bit. And we're going to take a very sober look at why that's happening, especially around the city of Kyiv, and how that siege is beginning to take shape. And we'll also look at the other advances that Russia has made inside Ukraine today in the last 24 hours specifically. With us tonight, intelligence analyst Eric Garland. How are you, Eric?
Doing great, thank you.
A strategist for the Democrats and others, whoever wants to be strategized by her. Rachel Bitecofer, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. And Michael Mackay, our Ukraine expert, is with us again. How are you, Michael?
I'm well. Thank you, Seth.
So I think we're going to start with you because clearly that's where the news is tonight. So the situation is looking a little dire. Not that it hasn't looked dire in the last 7 days, but it's looking a little worse. You know, we've been seeing a tremendous effort by the Ukrainians to defend their country against the Russian invasion. That is beginning to change a little bit tonight because there have been some advances by the Russians. We've also seen them capture a city of Kherson. We'll show that on the map in just a second. But that is beginning to be a worrying sign. Tell us a little bit about what you know.
Well, you say it's dire and worrying, and I agree it's worrying, but I would not say it's dire. That's not my assessment. I see this as we're 7 days into an offensive that Putin said boastfully would be over in hours. And we're at the 7-day mark. And more realistically, if Ukraine was going to be the country that would have submitted to a blitz attack, it would have fallen by day 3. But this is not true. It was never going to be that kind of a target. So I see this as the Ukrainians fighting an incredibly smart battle. They're giving way where they need. They're forcing the Russians to extend their supply lines, which have been proven to be a tremendous weak point. Yes, the capture of Kherson is worrisome. It is the first major city where the center of the city was in control, but it's not full control. And just minutes ago, I saw realistic reports about a counterattack. So the control is not solid.
Let me clarify then.
It will always be very difficult for the Ukrainians because it's in the south. But you know, the Russian advance is slower. Much slower than it needed to be from the Russian point of view. It's extended. It's poorly supplied. It still suffers from low morale. And the situation here is not in any way breaking the spirit of the Ukrainian people to defend themselves. In fact, it's increasing it.
Right. Let me clarify a little bit of what I meant there by dire. I mean, it's going to be this next phase is going to encounter a lot more civilian losses. It feels like it.
Yeah, that's true. He's gone from there's this blitz attack and the Ukrainians will surrender, and now it's I'm going to commit war crimes like I did against Grozny in Chechnya in the 1990s.
Indiscriminate shelling of cities, of apartment buildings, missiles, you know, things that actually starving a city, trying to starve cities by surrounding them. You know, this is stuff that's just crimes against humanity. It's not just trying to beat an army.
That is certainly, I would agree, dire is the right word there.
Yeah, so that's the thing that concerns me. I mean, it's still, as you're pointing out, very amazing that the Ukrainians have been able to push back so much. You know, it is only one city. It is 7 days in. That convoy, if it is a convoy, whatever it is that's parked on a street in Ukraine, it doesn't seem to be moving very much. That is not a good sign for the Russians because clearly that is a lot of supplies and efforts that they're hoping to return to the forces that are waiting around Kyiv and other cities.
Yeah. As you say, the convoy is parked. You're talking about the one that extends from the Belarus border down to Kyiv. That only works if it's just a clean drive and they drive into the city. Right. But that's not happening. They're parked. All reports are there. They've been there for 2, now up to 3 days, and they're out of food and they're out of fuel. So this is an army that has been defeated, or let's not say defeated, but rendered ineffective without being destroyed because they're just sitting there, unable to fight.
Go ahead.
I'll go for defeated in the sense that this is a great military catastrophe. The notion that you have this, okay, we're all people of a certain age. For y'all who remember the, you know, because we do have some millennials and Gen Z folks who might be watching the show, we hope, off the Twitters.
They do, actually. They do, amazingly. Large amounts of them.
Good. But, you know, if they didn't remember, like, the 80s, that, you know, if we ever got into a scrape with the Russians, you know, it might be the last thing we saw.
Right.
You know, were you going to get to see the mushroom cloud, or were you going to be part of the mushroom cloud? And, then we hit 7th grade dances. I mean, that was just growing up. But here we are. The Russians are as close to their, home territory as possible, in a place that they've had, all sorts of intelligence agents and special forces. They've invaded since 2014. And it's a Trafalgar. It's a Waterloo. It is a disaster. You have propaganda, of morale, logistics. I mean, it is one of the most embarrassing military operations in modern warfare history. And it's almost inexplicable. They're capturing teenagers who, were parked to hear them tell the tale. They were parked in Crimea. They thought they were doing regular, exercises, and they find themselves unequipped and without, as much as trail mix and Gatorade to invade a country that goes from the equivalent of Toronto to the Chesapeake Bay.
It's a large amount of space, and people that you might know, friends, might live there. In fact, family members might live there. It's not just a country that you're not familiar with. It's very close relatives to the people you are.
This would not be entirely dissimilar from, a bunch of scrawny kids in Vermont who can't do 100 sit-ups invading Canada.
Yeah, right.
And we're going to take Quebec and Ontario and see how it goes. And they have their own consumer-grade cell phones on them. I don't know if you've seen the videos where they're calling their moms. The fact that there are regular soldiers, this is not even Wagner Group. This is not, randos from ISIS or, the last Taliban from Belgium to kind of roll in. I'm in too, guys. These are Russian regulars. This is the Russian military. That they have consumer-grade electronics on them that have their mom's number in it is an operational security failure. I don't even know if they've planned for this kind of thing at West Point. Any major army that would be this level of screw-up. It's actually literally...
But I want to point out something there, Eric. The point is that the Ukrainian army did. They did plan for this. The Ukrainians knew perfectly well this is what the attack would be like. And they had told the Americans, but the Americans didn't believe them.
Is that true? That's still true. I think the Americans would
that they would have Samsung phones on them. I mean, that they would attack, yes, and that they would
that the attack would be exactly like we had seen in Donbass with these, as you said, these shabby recruits. No, the Americans kept the idea of a peer force, and that to me is a mistake. That they did not pick the right information to get to the decision makers about what was going to happen.
So you're talking specifically about the fact that these were untrained soldiers would be coming across, or are you talking about the fact that there was going to be a potential attack of the whole country? Because the Americans did soldiers,
that there would be no actual air support, that there would be no supplies, there'd be no provisions, there would be no ammunition beyond 2 days. This is everything that the Ukrainians knew and everything they planned for. So their successful defense, which is the flip side of this, is not, to me, a surprise at all.
Right.
I mean, it's surprising to most people who are hearing about this for the first time and say, oh, this is amazing. But I've been seeing it all along for 8 years. So
right. They know this territory well. They've been fighting a war for 8 years.
It's important that people realize this now and fast. But the point is the Ukrainians were prepared for it.
The thing that's also very different this time around, of course, from the last time, is Joe Biden and this incredible array of sanctions and efforts by the world to sanction Ukraine. I mean, this is an incredible array of sanctions. I mean, not to mention the swift new sanctions against the oligarchs. There is no flying over American airspace for Russian warplanes or any planes. There's a lot of things that are happening right now that, are not going to make the average Russian consumer a fan of this war. We could talk a little bit about Joe Biden there. And talk
that puts it pretty mildly.
Yeah, right? Don't take my Apple phone away. That's not going to make me a fan. Rachel, this was a big deal in the State of the Union last night. Clearly changed the tone and tenor of the Biden administration because he, was able to address the joint houses of Congress as a real unifier because everyone is really unified, it seems, strangely enough, considering the GOP's passion for the Russians, but is unified in this issue of Ukraine.
Yeah, generally speaking, if you get to make a speech about foreign policy, it's bad for a lot of people, but it's good for you because it keeps you off domestic issues. And generally speaking, we are a unified population. I mean, even with Iraq, we think about it as divisive, and it certainly was amongst some, but in terms of Congress, it was not divisive at all. When that vote happened, it was uniform, basically. And we're not used to having to fight a domestic enemy. And that propaganda network that they have, and that's Fox Plus, all of the others, is really undermining national security at this point. If you don't get a rally around the flag effect, which we don't have right now, and if you would have told me it was possible for Russia, for us to go against Russia, it's not ISIS in Iraq, okay? This is a major all of us are Cold War kids, major geopolitical thermonuclear war stakes event, right? Yeah. And you just never would assume that you'd have, I mean, I'd probably put the estimate about 30% of the GOP caucus believes or is in tune to this idea that Russian autocracy is something to aspire to. I mean, they're talking about it nightly on that network. And when people show me who they are, I accept it, right? So that's what this is what you've got. They're not even normalizing it. They're glorifying, this idea that you can walk down the streets of Moscow and not see a gay person, right? Well, and we all know why, right?
It's interesting you're saying that it's a national security risk, that these propaganda networks that Fox News has become actually a national security risk. It's no longer just, hey, you're messing with people's minds before an election. You're actually messing with people's minds during a major national security crisis. And that's a whole different thing.
Let me just expand on that just a tad bit too, especially because I have the ear of Eric and Michael, and they're both just, way tuned into this. Like, this is why it's a risk, right? Like, if you don't get a rally around the flag effect and this conflict extends as we anticipate, looks like Putin is going to use a Stalingrad. Like, did anyone explain to him, by the way, that Stalingrad won at the end? So sieging is not necessarily, going to come out with a good process. But this idea, we really need people to understand how fundamentally different that will be for us if we don't have the public, and you cannot have the public if you don't have the Republican voters and their right-leaning independents. And those people, I'm telling you guys, as an expert in public opinion, it flows from the top down. We set frames. Okay. So there will not be a rally around the flag effect, aside from maybe something catastrophic, like nuclear weapons are getting aimed, or when Republican elites like the Fox News channel and other media figures give Republican voters permission to support Biden. And that I just don't see coming. So
the bounce we saw during Bush, which was a significant bounce, which actually won him the second term, right? I mean, at least he won the House in the second term. It was the first term, but the second part of this first term. Did he win that year? I think he did win that year, Bush.
Well, here's a more good point, okay? Yeah. After 9/11, even 2000 was a contested election that was decided in the Supreme Court. Right. You could not ask for a more toxic environment prior to the current modern thing that we're going through. Yeah. And yet, after 9/11, those weeks, that month, Bush was at 90% approval. Okay, so that means he had all the Republicans and all the Democrats, basically, right? And you would think, to put this into context, the electorate is different in America. Political behavior has changed. These are quantitative facts. And if this same thing was happening in the 90s, even with Clinton, we would see a robust rally around the flag.
That's how different the whole system is. Wow.
Yeah.
The landscape has changed so much. That's really interesting. Eric, can you talk a little bit more about these sanctions? I know you've got a deeper understanding of how the banking systems of the world work and all of that, but are they going to do enough damage to Putin personally and to the people in power around him? Or do you think he's anticipated this with these foreign reserves?
What foreign reserves? Where?
Well, he says he's got 630 billion or something foreign reserves, which is apparently quite a lot for them. And that's what he was going to use to how
are they going to transfer it? They're out of the SWIFT system.
Well, that's the complicated. It is they can't really transfer it. Some of it in Russia. Yes. Some of it is not. Some of it's in places like Canada or other parts of the world, in which case it's really hard to transfer them.
No,
31% is in China.
When they sanction, France has announced this, the United States announced this, when they sanction your central bank, everybody's central banks has a certain reserve. And I believe, for example, in France, it's some 10 to 50 billion in euros, something like that, worth of rubles that facilitates the exchange between rubles and euros from France, for example. And I think each country would have this in whatever measure to the exchange that they have. There's a similar measure between the United States and Russia, et cetera. But if they come in and seize those and go, you can't get to them, you can't exchange those rubles for euros and pass them to a Russian citizen who can do anything with them. You also, and when you're out of SWIFT, then you can't transfer it anywhere because all these banks use the SWIFT protocol to send. And so they're really messages between central banks so that they can exchange through different currencies on a fixed rate. You're out.
So it's going to be tough for them to get a hold of these things. But this is an interesting chart that I found just earlier on from Statista.
Putin doesn't have a Putin ain't got a credit card. He can't buy a hot dog and fries. He's done.
Well, but this was his plan. He was planning for this, right? He thought, yeah, apparently. And this is what
I love his plan.
It doesn't seem, it seems to have some,
Michael, do you love his plan as much as I do? Well, the whole, please seize my yacht for, because they took Alisher Usman.
I don't think he was anticipating it was going to be as onerous, but I think he was anticipating some sort of backlash.
This is a weird geopolitical BDSM moment. He just take my yacht, take all my money, give me moldy potatoes, and freeze all my central bank reserves.
I mean, none of this makes sense. None of this makes sense.
You guys like this plan?
So this is interesting. Look at this chart that I got from Statista, which tells us where the money is. I mean, it's interesting to me that China has so much of their central bank reserves, and then it goes from there. Spain, Germany, those are sort of expected. The United States has some of it too. That's going to be frozen for sure, as will most of the stuff. It looks like it, but some of it will still be available to him. I imagine that the Russia-China portions will still be available to him.
No, you're missing this.
It's still not going to happen.
To sell the gold, he'd have to exchange something. And they have to go through a bank and a wire.
They couldn't do it through.
When you're out, you're out.
There must be still SWIFT or some sort of communication available to them between banks. Was there not? I just heard it was just 3 banks that they had lost.
No, this is they're clamping down all over the place. And once you get the central bank involved, they're just Spur Bank, Venetia Commonwealth Bank, VTB, all the. There's not,
Yeah.
No, you're done. This is why my joke online has been, Acorn Hummus Coin. That's the new crypto that everyone needs to look out for, backed by some real tangible assets that Central Asia can get behind, acorns and hummus. And they have an Acorn Hummus Coin-based crypto economy right now. Because, and, if you can't get a hold of the U.S. dollar, there's a little bit of a complication now. It's minor. I don't know if this affects everyone's business or every country necessarily, but you can't buy or sell petroleum.
I
don't know if that's a problem for some economies, but I know some.
Some might have a lot of investments there in oil and gas, you might think.
They use it in the shower, it's shampoo, or they use it to run the
But to put it into Russian terms, which is something that they're now talking about. If you want to talk about what's lighting up social media in Russia, it comes down to buckwheat. Buckwheat is the famine food. If you don't have buckwheat, is the last thing you have, and if you don't have that, that's it. So, and they're talking about that.
Really? Is there going to be a shortage of buckwheat because they won't be able to buy it and trade it, or just because
That's
what people? Well, they're worrying about it.
Yeah,
Interesting. And if you're worrying about that, it's like if we were to worry about bread.
Right.
Like
you think you'd be worried about the state of mind of your leader. I mean, it seems like, and how to get him out of power more than any of these other things, because what a stupid move the whole thing seems to have been. There is a big factor going on, we shouldn't ignore it, is the debate around the no-fly zone. I get that we don't want to be at war with Russia. No one wants World War III, but there is a civilian catastrophe on the verge of happening in Ukraine. Or at least might happen. And the only thing that people can really think of that would stop that is a no-fly zone. Or is there something else that any of you three can think of that might be as effective?
Well, let me tell you what the Ukrainians are asking for. They're asking for a no-fly zone. They're saying, clear the skies, we'll do the rest. And what they're saying is, it's not a question of there will be war or we're declaring war. There is a war. Mm-hmm. We're in a state of international war. And if you think it's just between Russia and Ukraine, you are mistaken. That's not the way the Russians think when they are making this attack. For example, when Putin told his great lie that his invasion was denazification, he didn't mean that Ukrainians are Nazis, although he does think that. But he was referring to, for example, what he called the Revolution of Dignity. He called it a CIA Nazi coup. So that this uprising, this democratic uprising, was sponsored by the United States, the major Nazi power, and the CIA. And of course, Ukrainians were either dupes or also Nazis. And of course, you say this is the craziest ideology of all, but it actually motivates him and what he pushes on his people. And what Russians have been told, with increasing virulence since the start of the Putin dictatorship, is that they are at war with the West. And when they say Ukraine, it is the West, because that's what it actually is. If Ukraine is democratic, and it is the West. If it is leaning towards the EU and NATO, which it is the West. It has these ambitions. So the reality of the war, as it's understood by the major combatants, is that it is a war between Russia and the West, and that it's an existential one. It's about survival. So the question about, is this declaring war or is this World War III, is actually a discussion that is not happening in the central part of the war. It's not a part of that framework. So when Ukrainians say, clear the skies, we'll do the rest, they're saying, we are in this war, and we either fight it to win it, or we fail in our responsibilities to ourselves and our way of life. It is at that level. I think that needs to be the framing. So regardless of what justifications you want to put about it, our NATO obligations, which are, by the way, irrelevant, or our fear of nuclear Armageddon, or if we're going to call it World War III or declare it like that, what you're doing is making a choice to use the United States' most effective power, which is its military power, to save lives now, or not use it and cause those lives to be lost needlessly. That is the moral choice.
But there's also just a reality that most Americans are not ready to send their kids to fight a war in Ukraine. And I know you're going to say it's a no-fly zone.
Ukraine has never asked for that. We'll do the fighting. And they have been doing the fighting. And they'll keep doing it.
If there are planes in the sky that are American planes,
clear the skies.
It would involve fighter jets shooting down other fighter jets. I mean, there is war there. There's not like, there's no way to get. So it's going to, the no-fly zone would still.
And there will be casualties and there will be losses.
Yeah.
Yes.
Necessary losses, you're saying, because it's going to save all the people in Ukraine and it's going to let the West win, which is really what's
happening. But it's not going to happen in a vacuum, right? Yeah. So if
it's going to cause fewer people to die. If you have an offended no-fly zone and a skirmish happens, which is highly likely with a no-fly zone and an aggressive aggressor, right? You can't make a moral calculation and leave out the other half of the equation, right? So let's say, and I'm definitely curious to Michael's response on this, that you do the no-fly zone, and I am very sympathetic, obviously, to the need for it. But let's say we do it, and there's a skirmish. I mean, the whole paradigm that all of us have experienced in our lifetimes is to avoid a moment where Russia and the United States might engage in some capacity in a hot war, in a hot combat, because it was believed that from that you'll have escalation into a real conflict. And then if it escalates enough, we've got a nuclear world. I mean, the whole world is armed and aligned in these two loosely defined alliances between East and West, right? So, it's just not, of course, I mean, if you focus exclusively on what's happening in Ukraine and the need of those people, the no-fly zone is a no-brainer, okay? But if you broaden that context, and I think our military planners certainly are forced to do so, and think about potential effects of a no-fly zone, it does broaden the possibility that we end up with a conflict that does entail Russia and the United States militarily.
We might land up there. We might land up there anyhow. Is what?
And we might.
You talked about a paradigm. What is that paradigm? It's a paradigm of the United States and Russia as peer powers, and that is a false paradigm. It's a pre-1991 paradigm. The actual war should follow a post-2014 paradigm, which is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's what's happening. That's what started in 2014. That is what is being extended now with this offensive that we're seeing. It is the Russo-Ukrainian war, an invasion. We've seen how it's worked. We've seen how it is working. And we can rationally predict how it will continue based upon what's happened from 2014 to today. And that is the paradigm. And the we're Cold War kids things, kids, as you said, accurately, that's about the audience of this program. But it's not about the major participants in this war. The United States is a bystander, unless it chooses not to be. Okay? And the only way it can effectively choose not to be a bystander is to do the right thing and to meet its obligations to Ukraine.
There's also NATO's obligations to NATO. I mean, those countries all are on the border there. And as this war worsens, as we've seen with the refugee crisis that's already building, but, this possibility that it's going to spread beyond Ukraine is also quite serious.
But neither Russia nor Ukraine are in NATO.
Right.
So that is not, the main issue.
It has impact over NATO. It has impact for us.
So what? Let's talk about what does affect it. The Budapest Memorandum, under which Ukraine gave up all of its nuclear weapons in exchange for security assurances from Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. There's something that directly bears on this conflict, and it obliges the United States to assure Ukraine's security within its internationally recognized borders. So there's something that actually pertains to this conflict. The discussion about NATO and the threat of nukes is actually being fostered by Kremlin information warfare to weaken the United States' greatest strength, which is its military power.
Do you think the United States should do the no-fly zone on its own?
Of course. What has NATO got to do with it?
Well,
any country can choose to deploy their armed forces how they choose for their own national security. It's a basic principle of sovereignty.
And based on the Budapest Memorandum. So that it's true that memorandum said that, we get your nukes and we get to give you security guarantees.
The signing parties can carry out their obligations.
Right.
They could choose to do anything they like. Everyone says, we don't have to use military force. Of course you don't. It's not a treaty.
Right.
But any country can choose to take action to meet their commitments.
That is a different framework to think about it. That is interesting.
But to build on Michael there, NATO, you've got Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. If there is an assault on one, that triggers the North Atlantic Treaty, and so it's an assault on all members. Not so with the Budapest Memorandum. However, as Michael points out, it's open-ended. And the United States is not limited. NATO's not its only party. It's not its only treaty. We have treaties with Canada, we have treaties with Australia and New Zealand and the Five Eyes Alliance and all that. Every country maintains its sovereignty, and we're a party to this Budapest Memorandum. And we can provide the security. And as Michael points out, it doesn't say how we can do it. A no-fly zone is one of the things that we could do to make up our obligations under that agreement to make sure that Ukraine's safe. If it happens to be from their neighbor Russia, which is complicated but not unworkable diplomatically.
And it's the calculation that has been in every conflict and war since 1945.
Right. You have to have this debate. It's one of those things that we have to discuss now. I mean, it's going to happen regardless. It seems you're right. In that regard, it's going to be a conversation we have in a week from now or 2 weeks from now or whenever. We might as well start having it now because it's clearly the big thing that's going to be asked for next. And we have to get beyond whether we can do this or not, whether we do it.
Yeah, but to be clear, this weakened Russian military, right? And it is a weakened arsenal because so much of it went to the former Soviet Union countries, and then Ukraine, of course, gave it up. So it's still, though, enough to end life on Earth, right? So they're weakened in terms. I think I've always believed that our military could roll over the Russian military in combat, right? I mean, that's why they're they're the most benefited, in my opinion, world player for the creation of nuclear proliferation and NAD, because they are so militarily weak compared to us. We would be able to boss them around.
Although every time we've been into a war in their region, we've lost, so
Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing, though. And Michael's pointing to Crimea and 2014, which was conditioned, I mean, both that and the genocide that we allowed in Syria, both conditioned on the American public, not an isolationism, right? Post-Iraq. So you fuck up Iraq, and then you end up not being able to go in like you would with Kosovo or other places and help a humanitarian crisis. And in Crimea, Michael, we didn't test Russia, right? I mean, at the end of the day, and it's not Obama being weak. It's about isolationism and two wars in the Middle East. The public would not have supported in any way that intervention there. So we never pushed them before. We have no fucking idea what's going to happen when we push these guys. And we do know, though.
But we do by seeing what Ukraine has done. You know,
yeah,
they do push back. They do directly fight the Russians. So if Ukrainians can directly do what the United States feels itself incapable of doing, who really is the power in this conflict?
Well, I agree. I mean, they've got all the cards. They've had us by the balls from the very beginning because of that.
But they don't have Ukrainians, do they?
Right.
So I know, and they don't. And you know, here's the thing with Ukraine. Here's the thing with Ukraine's resistance, right? Is, you know, what we have seen in this conflict is something we've never seen before. We've never seen a world economy isolate so quickly and so ruthlessly. I mean, we've really dropped the mother of all sanctions on this economy. So no matter how good Putin's misinformation and propaganda network is, it's going to have to get around the fact that now you want to buy a loaf of bread and it's 10,000 fucking rubles, right? So, like, I do think we want to be cautious in that. I think that there is a strategy. I think that strategy is economic level nuclear war against Russia. And it sucks that Ukraine's going through this. I mean, my God, if I could jump on an airplane out there right now and help Ukraine, I would love to do that. But it is,
I think you can. It's an international legion, by the way. But
yeah, this isn't ISIS. I mean, the equivalence is a conflict with China, right? So it gets complex when you have two basic frames in the world, you know, the West and the East. The East is aligned and as armed as the West. So we don't know what will happen when we go into a combat situation. And Michael, we may find out, right? That's the thing is, like, if they start to go in and unleash real unmitigated violence in Ukraine, it's it's all going to be, it's not 1945. You can see it all on a cell phone now.
But I made the point earlier that you need to be straight with the Ukrainian people. Exactly how much suffering are you expecting them to endure?
Right.
You know, before you'll do this. Because I think you see my point that it's immoral not to do that. We've said to the Ukrainians, stand by. For example, when the Russians came into Crimea, the Americans put pressure on the emergency Ukrainian government at the time not to fight back. You know, don't worry, the Russian economy will collapse. But of course, sanctions at that point were a joke, and that didn't happen. And Ukraine had to fight a war in Donbass for 8 years, suffering 15,000 casualties. And that was ignored. And again, don't fight back. Don't take the offensive. Keep this one-sided ceasefire of the Minsk agreement. These were the demands put upon the Ukrainian people. So I think Americans and other Western partners of Ukraine need to be upfront about the Ukrainians. How much more suffering are they expected to endure?
Just to back you up a little bit here, there's an interesting slide here about the real imbalance between the Russian and Ukrainian military forces here. I mean, we've sort of been told that they are sort of equal in number, but not really. When you look at all the breakdown here, the ground forces, you know, maybe there's some, because it's obviously the whole forces versus the forces assigned to this particular war, but still they're way outgunned by Russia in every single way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's terrible.
But then again, look at the war that's actually being fought. For example, you mentioned the attack on Kyiv. Well, experts in urban warfare assess that in this kind of a fight, you need a 5-to-1 advantage to even have a chance of doing something like a siege and capturing a city. And the Russians are at a 10-to-1 disadvantage. So it's not about how many troops you have in total, it's how many troops are good for the fight. And, you know, Ukrainians now a nation under arms. I mean, when you've got a country, I read a leaflet today, which was advice about how to attack a Russian military column. Let the tanks go through, attack the support vehicles in the rear.
How to build Molotov cocktails.
Use your Molotov cocktails.
Yeah.
Now, this information is going out to 40 million people. Well, that's total population. So, but we are talking
that's stunning,
about
really,
millions of people who can take this advice.
Yeah. But the government is issuing advice on how to take on tanks. That's what they want their citizenry to do in order to win this war. I mean, that's how desperate the situation is. I'm not saying that they aren't doing an amazing job, but they're asking grandmothers to make Molotov cocktails and to run around with AK-47s. I mean, it's a lot of ask for a population which you wouldn't imagine the United States would be asking their population under any circumstance.
And it's one that Ukrainians are happy to give, happy to meet.
Well, I mean, can you imagine a situation where your local family at your high school, they're building Molotov cocktails and taking on tanks? I mean, that would be a pretty unbelievable situation. Yes. Sorry?
Yes. I have friends and relatives doing it right now.
missed the comments there, but it's a lot. Sorry, I missed the comments there, Eric.
I was 6 years old talking about what would happen if the Russians invaded, and I was raised on we'd been in the Vermont hills for 200 years. No one had ever beat us, and if they ever took us over with heavy force, that we'd have crack shots on hills they couldn't understand, and they'd never take a street corner. So
but this is not theory. This is practice. This is reality in Ukraine.
And that's what the Ukrainians are doing. They're taking down the road signs. Apple Maps has been turned off. What do the Ukrainians need Apple Maps for? But the Russian invaders do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good move. That's what you do.
Move. But it's still.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, other than Crimea, and I'm not familiar with the area, so I'm treading as lightly as I can here on this topic. But in terms of Ukraine, right, we're not talking about a Middle East, maybe, third world type environment. We're talking about sophisticated, metropolitan, cosmopolitan, technologically current society. Yeah. And, I do think that they have leveraged those advantages because, I don't think Putin ever considered hey, if you're going to go try to occupy this place physically, because he can bomb it a lot, you can blitz it and kill a lot of people. But if you want to occupy it, you got to do man on. You have to go be in there physically.
For a long period of time.
And I don't think he calculated that you can't go in there Nazi style in the 1930s, 40s and just run over people. You can't. Everything is videotaped. Everything is live streamed. And so when these Ukrainians band together and go out on the streets and stand in front of tanks, that is a 21st century thing, okay? And what makes it possible is the media and all of the video evidence that's going to be coming out of there. If it was not for that tech, they would not be able to risk their lives that way.
But the point about that is it means that Putin will never win. And I think the whole world is realizing that. And so now it becomes a question, well, then how long will the war in Ukraine last? It either never ends or it ends sooner. And that depends upon the level of support we give to Ukraine.
Absolutely.
It doesn't depend upon the Ukrainian people because they will fight like hell with everything they've got through generations because that's exactly what they've done for generations. So that's not the question.
That's right.
The only open question is the level of support we give them.
And how soon do we take that off ramp? Eric, you must have a lot of thoughts about the no-fly zone, but you haven't expressed them yet. So what are your thoughts about whether we should do it or not?
I think we're delivering a great number of advanced aircraft to Ukraine. I believe the MiG-29s were being sent over in significant number. I'm not sure who's going to be piloting them. But, I think it would be better if we had,
But the answer is now for now is Ukrainian pilots. That they're being repainted right now as Ukrainian aircraft. They're being delivered to actually Ukraine and they'll be flown by Ukrainian pilots. So that's the answer as of now.
Got it.
But as of last I heard, they've not actually been delivered.
Okay. So, these are modern aircraft. This is, not flying, 1970s era stuff. I think it's better if the United States and other countries do not have their hands on the kinetic attacks against Russian troops. I think it's better if all of that comes with our support and then the Ukrainians actually effectuate that. That's the ideal situation. If it gets continuously more ugly, there's a humanitarian calculus that will change. That, normally we would want to let the Ukrainians fight this out themselves and support them because they're a democratic nation that's Western looking, unlike their invasive neighbor to the east. However, if this human rights violation stuff continues, which it's Putin, let's assume it will, maybe our calculation will change in 24 hours. And we can cross that bridge when we come to it. And I'll bet we will. We were already crashing their economy faster than any economy's ever been decimated in world history. And if you recall, about 4 years ago, we had a direct peer-to-peer engagement between Russian irregulars, the Wagner group that was run by Putin's chef there. Why am I blanking on his name? Prigozhin something. Yeah, Prigozhin. History's going to forget him for the most part. But anyhow, we had 300 of their troops against 100 of ours. And we took 0 casualties, and they had like 6 dudes walk back to Russia. I mean, it was bad. We have audio of it. We released it. A direct kinetic conflict between Russian, irregulars and U.S. regular troops was like, watching LeBron James play a 7th grade basketball team.
Okay, but to bring it to this context,
we have to rock these guys. We will.
But don't think it's just about what Americans can do. Ukrainians alone have inflicted, as of this hour, a little less than 8,000 casualties. They're reporting after 7 days of war that Ukrainian soldiers are suffering psychological trauma because they're killing so many Russian soldiers. That's, the effect on a person for doing that. And that's the Ukrainian army. So that's happening right now. And so we know what their army can do. And I have no doubts about what the American army can do, although, again, the Ukrainians are not asking for American soldiers to serve with them on the ground. They're just asking to clear the skies. And just one more thing for the humanitarian calculus. It's actually an environmental calculus. Clear the skies is not just saving civilian lives from bombers, which is one of the weak points of Ukraine's defense right now. It's anti-air. But the largest nuclear power plant in Europe is at Zaporizhzhia. It is in the process of being besieged by Russian forces. And I saw some photos and video today. The local people, unarmed, are blocking the road to the power plant by the hundreds so that the Russian forces can't get to the plant. And just today, the Russians fired grenade launchers and so on at the crowd, and it's just horrible. So that is the price Ukrainians are making. Now, what would happen? You don't have to think very hard. You don't need to be an expert if the Russians started to hit the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant with heavy artillery, which they can easily do. And which they may do. It would cause an environmental catastrophe that would be greater than Chernobyl.
Just to back up a little bit here, are you saying that we could do this without U.S. aircraft? I mean, is it possible to do a no-fly zone using over-the-horizon missiles and whatever the Israelis have, the Desert Dome thing, whatever they have? I mean, is it possible to protect the airspace without having to commit U.S. aircraft and pilots?
Of course, yeah.
There's a way to do that.
Look at the American command and control aircraft that have been flying over Ukraine for many years. I don't think they're flying there now because of the danger, but they've been welcome to do that, so they know the space very well. So there's command and control, which is a way to control the airspace. There are the unmanned combat aerial vehicles. Ukraine has had enormous success with the Bayraktar drones that have been shipped from Turkey, and they've just got a new batch today, and this has inflicted enormous damage on these columns. But what they need help for now is to stop the bombers that are flying from Belarus and more help in bringing down cruise missiles.
But they can do that over the horizon,
right? A ballistic missile once it's launched, but a cruise missile you can bring down.
Right, but you don't have to fly planes necessarily. You can use it over the horizon.
There's other resources and so on.
So maybe that's the conversation that needs to be shifted to. Maybe the connection between World War III happening and the no-fly zone is maybe not as accurate as it should be. Maybe they should be talking about a no-fly zone just being necessary for the humanitarian disaster. It doesn't have to involve American troops per se or American pilots.
Yeah, but I mean, if someone violates the no-fly zones, that other than these missiles, right? That
the Ukrainians have planes. The Ukrainians have planes. And what do you do if somebody whether it's fired from the ground or the air? If somebody shoots down a Russian fighter that's violating the no-fly zone, then we have escalation. Right, but the Ukrainians could do that anyhow with the planes were given.
It's the territory of Ukraine and the airspace of Ukraine. And
right, I didn't say justification. I said escalation. Right. Yeah, they're totally different, though.
But it's going to happen. There's going to be
you are 100% right, Michael, on the morals. Absolutely, and I can't even imagine having to.
But I'm saying it's not escalation; that it's de-escalation. So I think we fundamentally disagree there. It is de-escalating the war because not doing it encourages the Russian regime of state terrorism. Because that's
I actually agree it would de-escalate the war directly in Ukraine probably, but it will escalate it outside of Ukraine, I would expect.
But where is Putin's focus? It is on Ukraine. This has been his war all along. As I said, the United States is a side campaign of this. It is not the central player in this conflict.
I mean, I would have agreed with you going into this, the whole run-up till they invaded, maybe even the first couple of days. But now, because of what we have unleashed on them economically, I don't know. You know how it is, like you care about something a lot until something happens, like you get cancer, and then you're like, I care about this instead. You know, I could envision where Putin's concerns are starting to shift, right? To political survival, maybe actual survival if there's a coup, right? You had from the very get-go dissent in the streets of Russia. That is a monumental statement to make. People flooding the streets of Russia, and that was before the financial implications break through the propaganda barriers. So it is Putin, to me, of 2 weeks ago is probably making a different calculus than he is today.
100%. He has to be. There's no ways he's looking at a ruble that's worth less than a penny and thinking, oh, I can still do this war. It's just not, it's not feasible. Let's take a look at some videos if we can. I just want to show you a couple of things that happened that are kind of interesting just to illustrate what's going on. So this is a Russian soldier who surrendered, making contact with his family on a Ukrainian phone there from Ukraine. Eating food, I think, for the first time in a while. This is an old woman who's actually in the middle of these protests in Russia. She does not look, she's probably over 80 or 90 years old. Maybe not that much, but still, she's been taken away by police. A terrific thing. This is what state TV looks like.
Они ведут себя как фашисты в самом прямом смысле. Неонацисты ставят военную технику уже не просто рядом с жилыми домами, а там, где в подвалах укрыты дети.
So that's what the Russians are being told, that they're fighting fascists. And they're liberating the area of the Donetsk People's Republic, whatever they called it there. I mean, they're getting told a very different story than we are being told, and yet they're still out there in the streets protesting. And most Russians, I think, are still opposed to the war quite dramatically. What's your sense of whether that could lead us anywhere, Eric? I mean, we've spoken a lot on this show about Navalny. We've spoken a lot about, regime change in Russia. Is there a possibility that this thing could ignite an uprising of some sort in Russia where Navalny could be, freed for one thing, but also, a real contestant for power?
I can't speak as to the situation around Navalny as a future political leader, but as far as the taste for a political change, when you take out the economy underneath any society, the political calculus changes pretty quick. Rachel's pointing out what happens when something really basic and important, a really ugly X-ray or a red letter from the IRS, kind of a change in life, tends to change priorities real quick.
Yep.
When your currency is no longer traded on the world market and you've got Acorn Hummus coin, and you want to talk about, look, people had like some imbalance between like Diet Dr. Pepper and regular Dr. Pepper in this country for like 4 days. And they're like, oh my God, they're trying to get rid of Biden. And there's trucks and ports and something. And it's like,
absolutely.
A couple things happen. This is that, but like real, where you run out of, industrial lubricants you've never heard of, or tungsten, or all the things that make an actual economy go. Your currency is no more, then you don't have that. And then your jobs go away, then your food goes away, and then your president goes away.
Yeah.
Because you only, look, every civilization is about 7 meals away from anarchy.
It's an interesting point.
It's about 7 meals.
Oh, no, he's definitely right. People don't realize what happens in war. Like starvation killed more people in World War II actually than anything else, I believe. I mean, maybe not the 6 million Jews, but it was a lot of people. I mean, no, definitely more people. Right?
Yeah, no.
And, I mean, when you can't eat, desperation sets in quick, really quick. And then as that escalates, if that starts to happen in Russia, And it could well finally happen because of what we've done. Putin is going to become very, very hot in his seat.
It also is going to draw them closer to China, which is interesting.
Especially as we the United States and other countries that are doing the same thing with sanctions, the more that we expose what kind of assets that the Russian oligarchs have. That I would be surprised if our various information organs don't beam that out as loud as possible so that Russian citizens can see just exactly where their country's wealth has gone.
Right.
And we're already taking a few $800 million yachts off the seas.
Yeah.
But what's going to happen when they realize just how much money that Dmitry Peskov and all the Sergeys and
absolutely.
Well, it starts with he's got a soccer team he has to sell, but how many apartments does he have? 25, 72, 172.
How did he get them? How did he get them?
And
Why
50
does he have them?
in Miami and 10 in London, right? I mean, they have germinated, and I definitely don't want to use anchor baby, right? But they're anchor baby real estate, and China's right there with them, right? And we look at the housing crisis in the U.S., and all we ever talk about is, it's this and that. No bullshit, dude. It's all these foreign investors buying shit up for cash. Dude.
Exactly. That's the biggest problem with the American economy. And let's leave everyone with this incredible image because it really, it speaks for itself. This is a mother's tweet saying goodbye. She's going to war to her son as he's on her, I guess, fatigues and her crew and her things that she's taking to the front or wherever she's going. I mean, it's really heartbreaking. It's this is what we're talking about in Ukraine. Mothers are leaving their kids behind, their babies behind to go and fight this war. It's not, it's everybody's war in Ukraine. And it's really a heartfelt image. And she hopes she sees him again, say on the other side, if she survives. I mean, really, it's just what a choice to have to make, And it shows you how committed they are to the battle for democracy.
It's a choice people who have experienced freedom will make every time before they fall back into despotism.
Really is a reminder to all of us, isn't it, in America, that there's how valuable the freedom is, because once you look how close these 7 days, their freedom has disappeared from them to some extent.
Yes, exactly.
And now they're going to fight for it. They're going to fight for it in the most unbelievable way.
The one good thing is that Americans are seeing how fast a civilization can fall to tyranny. And what happens when you have an autocrat? When you have an autocrat, if he wants to go invade the neighbor, even though they're all related, right? I mean, they're killing. No wonder they need counseling. They're killing their own relatives, right? The autocrat decides. So autocracy is nothing to aspire to.
And if we had that kind of horror happening here, we'd want a no-fly zone too.
Amen.
Just to pass it back up to you, Michael, that, it's when you think about it in those human terms, if you're involved in that war and you've got your family under that kind of threat, you'd want a no-fly zone. And you wouldn't think very much about asking for it from your allies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we'll work on the international law agreement and sign that later.
Right. Any other thoughts from you, Eric, before we wrap up here tonight?
We live in interesting times.
We sure do.
Take care of yourselves.
We sure do. Eric Garland can be found at Eric Garland on Twitter. And anything else you want to share with the audience? You can tell them where they can find your stuff. Meaning your...
Google me. There's stuff around.
Yeah, there's also Patreon accounts important and various other things, including a podcast on your Patreon. Isn't there a podcast on your Patreon? Wasn't there one today?
Yeah, back up and running. And so...
There you go. Interesting.
Talking lots of places.
That's good. Rachel Bitecofer, tell everyone about your PAC and how brilliant you are as a strategist.
Yeah, my focus is on pro-democracy work. And unfortunately, in America, we've got one party that's all in on democracy still and small L liberalism, and the other one that's fractured on it. So right now, a lot of my work is focused on keeping the Republican Party out of power until they can fix their family issues.
It's a good mission you have there. And people can find the PAC at, remind me again, it's at
StrikePAC, and my Twitter handle is at Rachel Bitecofer, not Bittencoffer.
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
All in the mood for Bitcoin
I hate
today.
making errors in those things. I'm so sorry. Oh
no, it's cool, dude.
Oh man, well there you go. I tried today. Made a mistake. Sorry about that, guys. And Michael Mackay, you're at
MHMCK.
At MHAMCK. Got it. All right. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. It's a really interesting conversation. I think it'll really help people understand what's going on in Ukraine to a great extent, but also really start thinking about this no-fly zone. It certainly seems like it's the issue that will be continuing being front and center of this conversation around how America can help the battle to defeat Putin in Ukraine. So thank you for being here tonight, all of you, and thank you for being here at home. We will see you again on Friday. Have a good night, everybody. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.